Nigeria provides enough distractions, and it is not my intention that you be distracted. In fact, the entire purpose of what I'm seeking to do, what I'm doing, is to ensure that I can keep you focused on the issues. So I will not succumb to the distraction that yesterday's charade, where were they having those charades again? Yeah, Imo, laughable. Imo, Kogi. Was there another place? Whatever it is, once you have Yakubu and INEC, and then under this regime, under this system, and there is all other mercy, you must be a compound fool to have expected anything different. In all honesty, I've not followed the news, but that's just an aside. I don't want us to get distracted by the nonsense that must have been for those of you who had no choice but to endure it, or who still had sufficient grace to follow what Yakubu and his ilk might do. Yakubu is merely a type. The 1001 Yakubu. Every polling booth must have a Yakubu for what has happened to our democracy to have happened. So I'm not going to waste my time talking about individuals who are merely at best screws in an entire system. Even your president is just a screw in the system of inequity that governs Nigeria. So I'm not going to delay myself and waste time on those ones. So, I have decided that increasingly I'm going to be drawing from the scriptures of our forefathers. I've been drawing from that scripture. I'll be using a lot of our proverbs to speak with us, because those proverbs, as I've maintained, they contain very deep truths. So one of them, I decided that before we start our day's business per se, I would like to speak to some extent to one of those proverbs and how the deep spiritual truths that are embedded therein have come to life in the Nigerian space. And what is that scripture? It is contained in the Yoruba proverb that says, Olowo kan láàrin olòṣì mẹ́fà, òtòṣì ni gbogbo wọn. Don't worry, I'll translate for you. What that simply means is that one rich man amidst 6 impoverished persons is just as poor and impoverished as the company in which he lives. Every time this comes to mind, a phrase that I believe it was Shino Dugbemi that first coined it in his column in The Guardian back in the early 90s. He called it, I don't want to claim ownership of that phrase. I believe it was Shino Dugbemi that first used it. He said, the poverty of private wealth. I have really found English interpretations or translations of our proverb that have been as apt as that one, but it does take an understanding of symbols and the capacity to introspect to come to the knowledge of the fact that if you are the singular rich person in a community of impoverished human beings, you are as poor as the society in which you live. This proverb started living rent-free in my head about a week ago. I had occasion to go to Abuja, and I traveled by the first flight, 6:30. And usually, as crazy as our aviation system might be, as inconsistent as the airlines might be, that would usually be one of the flights. Those are the flights that you can actually count on to be on time. So I was going with one of our airlines to Abuja by the first flight. And I live in the Lekki axis, so I had to wake up at 4 in the morning, and then I had to drive from where I live around Chevron. I got on the road, I believe, by 4:44, definitely way before 5 o'clock. And by the time I crossed the Lekki-Ikoyi bridge into Lekki, I encountered packs of riders, bike riders. That's not unusual. Every time I've had occasion to take early morning flights, I've seen them like that, very early in the morning, riding on Gerard towards Osborne, And they will usually, sometimes, I've seen them have escorts in front for some sort of protection. But this particular morning, as I was going, and I saw them, and I recall the unfortunate death, the tragic death of one of their members sometime last year. And I'd driven past the same place, maybe a couple of days before that incident. And then it dawned on me, maybe because I was, obviously, I had a lot on my mind. I was going to Abuja for the big press conference. And then it struck me. I was driving through what was probably the most expensive piece of real estate in Nigeria, the Ikoyi axis, where even flats wouldn't sell for less than hundreds of millions, where land, ordinary land, sells for billions, and its residents are not even serviced with something as basic as open spaces in which they may ride their bicycles safely. Such is the poverty of private wealth, the extent of the pervasiveness that even in taking care of enlightened selfish interest, the Nigerian rich, those who presume to shape our country, are not even capable of understanding what is in their own enlightened selfish interest. They drive over potholed, pockmarked roads in Rolls Royce. They build oases of affluence in the midst of ghettos. And then, the funniest part of the whole thing, oh boy, since after the EndSars tragedy, the massacre, there is a new one that has evolved in the richer neighborhoods, especially in Lekki Peninsula, Lekki Phase 1. You find that almost every street has a gate now because they are afraid of the reactions of the poor. And then you find that, I found over time that if I was going to a particular street or I needed to use a street as shortcut within Lekki, all I needed to, once I know that the neighborhood has a hotel, I'm going to that hotel. So all the password and all that nonsense about you must have passcode that was born out of the paranoia here, informed by the poverty of private wealth. The same gatesmen, because they are not security men, they are gatesmen that you have at your gates. The impoverished ones that you have kept down, or that by your own complicit silence have been rendered victims, just as much victim as you are. They open the gates. Address the poverty of private wealth. When wealth becomes as multidimensional as it has become in our space, we're caught in disaster. The system might be counting on the ignorance of the oppressed, but some of us will make sure that the oppressed would understand that it's not about tribe, it's not about religion. It has nothing to do with religion or tribe. It's about you wanting to divide them so that you might retain unconscionable power. Olówó kan láàrin olòṣì mẹ́fà. Olòṣì pátápátá ni dédé rí hàn. That is how Yorùbás will say it. Good morning, everybody. So it's 10 o'clock now. So today, we're meant to be talking about the idea of citizenship. You got me? The idea of citizenship. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. For those of you who came early, we shared some Yoruba spirituals. For those of you who are just coming bang on time, you missed Sunday school. If I were you, I'll take a look at it later on so that I can watch. I believe I was in the spirit. All right, so service begins now. and today's topic is the idea of citizenship. What do I mean by idea of citizenship? I am a very strong believer in definitions because I believe definitions set parameters. And when you are able to look at issues, concepts within parameters that have been clearly defined, it becomes that much easier for you to understand, even though you might disagree. So if we are going to be having a disagreement, we will then have clarity as to exactly what we're disagreeing about. So what is an idea? An idea is essentially a thought. A thought. It becomes actionable when you act on it. So, what are ideas? Everything that you ever see done, whether it is abstract or physical, anything that is created began with an idea. Somebody thought about it. The human mind is the seat of his creativity. That is where all of his ideas originates from. His mind is informed by his worldview. His worldviews are largely informed, unfortunately, by his religion. But ideas build what we see. Nigeria is an idea. A very bad idea. A very, 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 very bad idea. It was a possession of a British company. Several parts of it. And then the British, because of the idea of colonialism, which is about extraction of the value of the land that has been colonized, formed the idea of a Nigerian colony. I'm not wasting time telling you about the amalgamation, protectorate of this, protectorate of that. I'm not going to waste that time. I told you already, go download the imperatives of the Nigerian Revolution. I took time to explain it there. So the idea of Nigeria began with the idea of exploitation, expropriation of the people's wealth. It formed and began originally with slavery. It was not benign. There was nothing benign about the idea of Nigeria. So as an idea, Nigeria was an evil idea. It began with the idea of dominion of one man over other men. So it wasn't created for your benefit or mine. That is the idea that created Nigeria. But Nigeria evolved beyond that idea. However much we may agree or disagree with the evolution of Nigeria, it evolved. It evolved to the point of pre-independence. It evolved to the point of multiple engagement amongst the Nigerian people themselves, unfortunately midwifed by the British, whose interests were never benevolent and remains not benevolent either. So, Nigeria, as an idea of the British, was accepted by those you refer to today as the the fathers of Nigeria, the Ahmadu Bello, the Azikiwe, the Awolowo, the Okpara, each and every one of them, even the living legend, Chivayo Adebanjo, each and every one of them bought the idea of Nigeria. But they then came with their different ideas as to what they expect that Nigeria to look like. But there is something very, very important that you must keep in mind, that at all points in time, the Nigerian, those who are today called Nigerians, were not directly queried as to whether they want to become part of some contraction, but they, of course, trusted certain men who purport to represent their interest and negotiate on their behalf. So, multiple conferences back and forth, the idea of Nigeria as a federation became sold. The acceptance of such a federation along very clear parameters were also received. But the Nigerian did not engage Nigeria as a citizen. He was a member of one ethnic nationality or the other. That was the basis of engagement with the Nigerian state that emerged in 1960. But it is one thing to declare something to be so. It is quite another thing for that thing to be what you say that it is. And for this to become a little clearer to some of us, I'm going to labor to define citizenship, just as I've labored to define idea. You must have historical understanding for the concept of citizenship before you might begin to appreciate its true meaning and exactly how far away we are as people from the concept of citizenship. The concept of citizenship began in, don't worry, I know I'm talking about modern citizenship. We were always citizens long before the Europeans came to this shore, but we will come to that later on. But the concept of modern citizenship, because Nigeria pretends to be a modern state founded on a constitutional democracy, began in Greco-Roman times. Essentially, Rome, as a city-state that began to extend its border, took the old idea of the Greeks, which meant that if you were able to purchase citizenship, you could become the citizen of a protected person of a powerful state, which means that that state would demand an account for you if anything should happen to you. So the prestige of the state from where you come went with you wherever you went back then. So the concept of citizenship began as something you purchased. And then as time advanced, it evolved to the point where it applied over time to those who are able to meet certain criteria. It wasn't available to everybody. And then over time, and I'm talking centuries, over time with the Magna Carta, with subsequent bills of rights, it evolved to the point where men, if you are free of debt, you're deemed a citizen and you could vote and be voted for. It further evolved over time. There were women suffragettes, and then people began to demand equal right for women to vote after men had fought to be able to vote as of right. And I think those largely evolved out of the world wars where men had to go die. And in exchange for all this, you have to be sure that you created something that bound them equally with everybody else. But in all of this, in each and every one of these, men fought to advance the rights that eventually led to what you have in Europe, in America today, and in most parts of the civilized world, quote and unquote, when you talk about citizenship. Unfortunately for Nigerians, we are not citizens. They call us citizens, yes, but we are not citizens. You cannot have citizenship in a place where the law does not rule. It requires the rule of law, which guarantees equal rights to everybody, equal access to justice, equal treatment under the law. That is the only time when you can have citizens in a space. In the Nigerian space, The reality is that the law does not rule, and at its most basic level, the right of the citizen is the right to vote. That is the most practical demonstration of citizenship. The right to vote, the sovereignty of your will. It is the collective sovereignty of the people that should be expressed at the ballot and that should be reflected in high offices. If we had forgotten what took place in February and March, what is taking place as we speak should be graphic enough to let you understand and grasp very clearly that the one thing you are not is a citizen. My brother and friend, Yele, tends to make the state react in its most extreme form. And for a while, I couldn't understand what it was that they found so objectionable, until I began to ask myself, exactly why is it that he appeared to attract trouble from the state? And then it struck me. It is because he has never learned how to pretend to be anything but a citizen in a space where there are no citizens. So, his presence attracts the reaction of the state. So if we were all going to collectively refuse to dignify the state with our acquiescence, it becomes impossible for the state to treat us the way it has. But what is the idea behind the Nigerian state? Because I want to talk about the idea of citizenship. For every thesis, there must be an antithesis. Let's be clear about something. You cannot defeat an evil idea by reactions to that idea. You can only ever defeat an evil idea by presenting superior arguments and ideas. That is the only way you defeat evil ideas. So I said to myself, what is the idea underpinning Nigeria? Because when you build, anything that you build with the intention guiding your choices. You know what they say about cut your coat according to your, cut your suit according to your cloth. In one sense, that's correct, but you also design, that's the part where it says cut according to your cloth. Every time that you are building anything, whether it's a house, a business, a car, anything, a fridge, a lamp, anything that you are going to build, the use to which you intend to put that thing governs your design choices. So you wouldn't build a hall, you would not design a hall the same way you design a flat. You design a hall to be cavernous and have open space, but a flat, you have all the partitions and everything. So your design intention governs your design choices. If Nigeria is designed to be the way it is, these are my own deductions now, it must be because an idea created the Nigeria that we have today. So I began to look at the character of the Nigeria that we have today. One of the very first things that struck me about today's Nigeria is the inability of the law to rule in the space called Nigeria. So if the law is incapable of ruling in the space, if those who are said to be the rulers are constantly kept in style, if the law applies to some and it does not apply to certain people, if this uneven treatment is the constant thing in that space, it struck me, and I've said it on multiple occasions, what we have today in Nigeria is a feudal system. Feudality is not accommodating of citizenship. because it is also incapable of tolerating the rule of law. If it wasn't about feudalism, why is Sirika not in a jail cell somewhere? Why do you think they would let what has happened happen where the state has become completely subverted? It is because some people must be protected. Those people who must be protected make sure that those who are coming after them are people who are just as objectionable as they are, simply because they do not want to be accountable to anybody. What is playing out in Rivers, for instance, should give you an inkling into what kind of system we have built. So Nigeria is found on the idea of feudalism, a feudal class that is above the law, that continually lives as pashas, enjoying the fat of the land, whilst the underclass are further impoverished. And in the impoverishment of the underclass, ignorance is also weaponized against that underclass. That is what has happened in Nigeria. The idea of Nigeria, a Nigeria where the Supreme Court and every strata of the judicial layer has been completely compromised, where the police answers to the rulers, the army answers to the rulers, the complete feudalization of the state and its institution. That is what you're seeing today. The only antidote to that is found in the idea of citizenship. I would explain. As I said before, Nigeria was not found on citizenship. It was found on the engagement of ethnic nationalities. That is why today you do not have an identikit of whom the Nigerian is. Everybody is busy trying to carve their ethnic kingdoms. The conscious persons agitating for change. It is easier to focus on Biafra, Oodua Republic, all kind of republics. And that is fair enough. These are reactions to the manifest evil that are in our space. I understand. And I'm not knocking these secessionist cause. I'm not knocking them. They are rooted in genuine grievances. But there is something I've said it multiple times, and I'm going to say it again. The only way to break Nigeria, if you must break Nigeria, is to first of all establish the right of citizenship for those who are Nigerians, trapped as victims of Nigeria. You would ask me how. We've tried voting so that we might restructure. But I assure you that before we ever went to the Pope, before there was a Peter Obi, I told you that somebody would emerge, we would follow, the system will kick, and we will be thwarted all the way to the Supreme Court. Go and read the imperatives of the Nigerian Revolution. It's in there. But we've entered a new phase. And that's the phase where you must all now begin to recognize the need to build citizenship as a bulwark against the evil of feudalism. Look at it this way. Each and every one of the persons who have traded off the grievances of each ethnic nationality that has been victimized by Nigeria have largely traded those grievances for seats at the table. My Yoruba brothers were rather vociferous about demanding Oodua Republic. And I know that there are still genuine people demanding that republic today, even in spite of the fact that Emilokan has now become Iyalokan everybody. There are still people who still genuinely believe, and I can't blame them. But the bulk of the people forming the army of Oodua Republic, where are they today? Unfortunately, or fortunately, that has now gone around to everybody, because the one thing that has been democratized is not just poverty, it's suffering on a wide scale. That, I believe, has been sufficient to awaken a lot of people to understand the fact that it's not about having a member of your ethnic nationality sat in that office. If you like, let him appoint. In fact, let him put everybody in his cabinet and make them Yoruba people. He's not going to change the fact that the pauperization of everybody has begun under this rule of reduce their purchasing power, widen the tax net, grab it, snatch it, run with it without any judicial relief in sight. So get it clear. Whatever it is you want to do with Nigeria, it is important that you first of all begin to understand that you must demand to be treated as citizens first. In demanding to be treated as citizens, you must understand very clearly the existing legal order is dead. They reinforced it for you in Imo and Kogi. Imo is probably the most brazen of the lot. They reinforced it for you. What they are telling you is that your votes do not count. Once whoever is at the apex of the mafia running the criminal entity that Nigeria has become, and it's not about Tinubu. It is not, Tinubu is not an octopus. He's probably at the weakest he has ever been in his political life and political career, and it's not about anything but the fact that age happens to the best of us. I'll become old and frail one day. How much exactly can a man in his 80s do? But it's a system. If you remove Yakubu from INEC today, that's why I'm not shouting remove Yakubu. If they remove Yakubu and they bring Yadudu or they bring Dudu or whatever they care to bring, what's that going to change? Nothing. If the system that has created INEC does not change, and that system is found on the idea of feudalism, if it does not change, nothing changes. Nothing. So you all need to get to the point where you understand that the way forward is that demand for citizenship, which now demands for a different way of doing things. Question is, who are we going to be making these demands of? Don't let's jump ahead of ourselves. It takes time to get to where we are going. But the first thing to do is to always understand that we cannot keep doing what we are doing right now and expect different reactions.